Check, check, check. So I don't know how far, how much it's freezing. Check, 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 check.
I would not, I would like not to have a live mic.
I'd now like to call a meeting of the Arlington City Council to order, and I'd like to call upon the Reverend Brenda Beaver from the Trinity United Methodist Church, who will give our invocation and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So good to see you, Reverend.
It's my honor to be here tonight. Let us all pause and pray. Our Heavenly Father, we come to you this evening asking for your blessing to be upon the business of hand concerning the city of Arlington, Texas. As we pause to acknowledge your presence among us, I offer grateful thanks to you for the council members' commitments to the quality of life in our community, especially in the midst of the current coronavirus pandemic our world is facing. Father, I especially ask that your wisdom and guidance would be with our mayor and each member of this council as they seek to calm the fears of our city's citizens, and that the leadership they offer during this crisis would offer support and encouragement to Arlington residents that we will all go through this circumstance together, caring and loving for each other. Grant to each council member a spirit of humility and service with a sensitivity to the needs of every citizen of our city. And Father, give to all who live here a grateful heart for the advantages that we enjoy. Give us a ready obedience to our laws and a profound concern for the rights and privileges of our fellow city residents. Guide us all to work together to promote justice, understanding, and cooperation in our community. These things we lift up to you this evening in the name of Jesus Christ, your beloved Son and our Savior. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag.
I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Next, we'll move to appointments to boards and commissions. Call upon Mr. Alex Buskin, our city secretary.
Thank you, Mayor. We have 3 appointments to boards and commissions. To the Citizens Environmental Committee, Glenn Troutman, Place 6. To the Housing Authority, Charlotte Quinta Jones, Place 2. To the Parks and Recreation Board, Kyle Fields, Place 9. Thank you, Mayor. This concludes the appointments to boards and commissions.
Okay, do we have a motion for approval? We have a motion for approval from Councilmember Farrar Myers, a second from Councilmember Moise. Please cast your votes. Motion passes. Next, we move to speaker guidelines and general decorum. Mr. Buskin.
Thank you, Mayor. We ask that the citizens and other visitors in attendance assist in preserving the order and decorum of this meeting. Any person making personal, profane, slanderous, or threatening remarks, or who becomes disruptive while addressing the mayor and the city council, or while attending the city council meeting, may be removed from the council chambers. For speakers tonight, when your name is called, please come to the microphone at the podium and state your name and address for the record. During public hearings for zoning cases, the applicant will be asked to speak first and will be given 5 minutes to make a presentation. Speakers in support or opposition of the item will be given 3 minutes each to make their statements. The applicant will then be given 3 minutes for any rebuttal. For all other items on the agenda and during citizen participation, speakers will be given 3 minutes to speak. If multiple speakers plan to provide the same or similar public testimony, those speakers may, if they so desire, designate one or more individuals to provide public testimony on behalf of the group. A bell will signal the end of each speaker's time. In consideration of other speakers, please conclude your comments promptly when you hear the bell. We ask that you address your comments to the mayor and council.
Okay, next we move to consideration of items from executive session. Mr. Buskin.
Thank you, Mayor. We have 2 items for approval from executive session. 1, a resolution authorizing the settlement of negotiations with UTA Iconic Investors, LLC, relative to the acquisition of a 209-square-foot street right-of-way easement in, under, over, through, across, and along a portion of a tract of land otherwise known as 805 South Center Street, Arlington, Texas, for the public use of constructing, reconstructing, maintaining, and using street improvements and all necessary appurtenances for the Sidewalk Program 2014 bond election project. 2, a resolution authorizing the city manager or his designee to execute a gas well temporary water pipeline license with Total E&P USA Barnett, LLC, relative to the construction, operation, and maintenance of temporary water pipelines within the City of Arlington rights-of-way. Thank you, Mayor. This concludes the items for approval from executive session.
Mr. Buskin, are there any speakers on this item?
No, sir. We have no speakers on this item.
Okay, then I'll call for a motion. We have a motion for approval from Councilmember Capehart, a second from Councilmember Nunez. Please cast your votes. Motion passes. Next, we move to consideration of minutes. Mr. Buskin.
Thank you, Mayor. Minutes for approval this evening are the afternoon and evening meetings from February 25th, 2020.
Do any council members have any additions or corrections? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Buskin, are there any speakers on this item?
No, sir, there are no speakers on this item.
Then I'll call for a motion. We have a motion for approval from Councilmember Nunez, a second from Councilmember Odom Wesley. Please cast your votes. Motion passes. Next, we move to consideration of consent agenda. Mr. Buskin.
Thank you, Mayor. The consent agenda this evening contains 12 minute orders and 9 resolutions. The minute orders seek to authorize 1 through 5 annual requirements contract for grounds maintenance of medians and rights-of-way, for landscape mowing of the Lake Arlington Dam, for grounds maintenance for water treatment pump stations and remote sites, for concrete repair work, and for traffic pavement markings and devices for the Public Works and Transportation Department. 6 and 7, renewal of annual requirements contract for miscellaneous concrete supplies and for generator maintenance. 8, artwork for public safety K-9 memorial sculptures. 9, contract modification number 1 to the engineering services contract for Turner Warnell Road, Cooper Street to Matlock Road. 10, contract modification number 2 to the engineering services contract for Davis Pressure Plane Phase 2. 11, developer participation contract for the Parkway Central Edition Lot 1 Block 12R development. 12, professional services contract for lab services for the Arlington City Jail. The resolutions seek to authorize 13, Pierce Birch Water Treatment Plant 48-inch water main leak emergency repair. 14, revision to financial policies and debt and disclosure policy. 15, appointment of director for the Viridian Municipal Management District. 16, Calendar Road, Eden Road to Harris Road, Paul Cuppett, Amy Cuppett, Guardian Mortgage Company, Inc., in Fort Worth Community Credit Union. 17, A and B, Rangers Ballpark lease agreement and non-relocation agreement. 18, sale of city-owned property, former right-of-way for FM 157. 19, contract of sale properties of Stadium Drive LLC, 711 and 715 Stadium Drive. 20, all-cash contract of sale Ballpark Parking Partners LLC, 1722 and 1726 East Division Street. Thank you, Mayor. This concludes the consent agenda for this evening.
Mr. Buskin, do we have any speakers in support or opposition to the items that appear on the consent agenda?
No, sir. We have no speakers on the consent agenda.
Okay, then I'll call upon Councilmember Capehart.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to remove item 8.8 for separate consideration.
Okay, we'll remove.
Sorry, if I also may, on 817, just a reminder that you were provided a substitute lease agreement this afternoon that set the operating date, and that you'll be voting on that substituted contract tonight.
Okay. All right, with that, then we will vote on the consent agenda minus 8.8, and then, of course, as the city attorney reminded us, 817 there is under an amended contract. Okay, with that, do I have we have a motion for approval of the consent agenda without 8.8 from Councilmember Sutton, and then seconded by Councilmember Nunez. Please cast your votes. Okay, motion passes, and I wanted to show that I abstained on 8.15 and 8.16. There. Yes, Councilmember Farrar Myers.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Buskin, could you also show me as abstaining from 8.15 and 8.18? Thank you.
And I will do also 8.18. Also, if I'm abstained from that one too. Okay, now let's move to item 8.8. There with it, Ms. Capehart.
Thank you, Mayor. 8.8, I will move to approve it happily, gladly. This is for a K-9 memorial sculpture. It's actually a sculpture of 2 different dogs, and it is to honor our K-9 officers, both police and fire. This is all raised money from the public, and it's been a labor of love for about 8 years, and so I'm delighted that we've been able to bring this to fruition and to be able to honor these service animals who do so much for our community, particularly with regard to keeping us safe. So, Mayor, with that, my motion is to approve.
Okay, we have a motion for approval from Councilmember Capehart, a second from Councilmember Farrar Myers. Please cast your votes. Motion passes. Next, we move to public hearings, consideration of ordinances, first reading, and resolutions. And we have a continuance on 11-1 and 11-2, both there in that respect. Do we need to take any action on that? Okay, then we'll just have the continuance on those two. We did have the applicant to ask for the continuance, but also it was very good because of our citizens having trouble getting down here in light of the virus. So I think that was, appreciate the applicants from withdrawing that so that we can have more public input on that. So next we move to 11-3 under the public hearing resolutions there, and I'll call upon Mr. Jim Parajon, Deputy City Manager, to talk about Lot J structured parking facility adjacent to Kayla Moore Park, 1601 East Randall Mill Road.
Like you put the, perfect. So, Mayor and Council and our residents, tonight is a resolution following a public hearing that allows for the conveyance of a easement on an existing city park in our entertainment district to allow for the use and construction of a fire lane access. It's a very de minimis amount of parkland. It's 4,159 square feet out of a very large park area. And the intent behind that would be to, as we build the public parking garage in the entertainment district, the fire lane access to the rear of that garage is necessary, and it would have a small minor encroachment into the park. So following the public hearing, I'd be happy to have council take action on the resolution before you. There were two standards that need to be met. One is the identification that the staff has looked at the prudent and feasible alternatives that may exist. In this case, as you can see, this is prudent and feasible. And then the second item is that all reasonable planning has been taken into effect. So we will mitigate any minor encroachment into the park with reseeding, resodding, as well as a relocation of the sign.
So it's 4,100 square feet, so that's about 0.1 acres, I guess. But the other thing, none of the stones or any of the major elements of the park are not disturbed, right?
All of the physical improvements of the park will not be disturbed other than the sign would be relocated. And as you said, it's less than 0.1 acre that's encroached upon.
Thank you, Mr. Parajon. I'll call upon Ms. Capehart.
Thank you, Mayor. My question may have already been answered. Mr. Parajon, I was wondering how close to that first set of stones does this come?
It's a significant distance away and does not have any effect on the structural integrity of the stone.
Okay, so any disturbance of the ground is not going to in any way impair the structure?
No,
Okay.
not at all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. With that, Mr. Buskin, are there any speakers on this item?
No, sir, there are no speakers on this item.
Okay, then I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion. I have a motion for approval from Councilmember Shepherd, a second from Councilmember Nunez. Please cast your votes. Motion passes. Next, we move to consideration of ordinances, first or final readings, and we go to 2019 Design Criteria Manual Revision. And again, I'll call upon Mr. Jim Parajon, Deputy City Manager, charge of Economic Development and Capital Investment.
So Mayor and Council and residents, before you tonight is a minor revision. It's more of a cleanup item to our design criteria manual. This is the manual the city uses, as well as our development community and contractors use to build public infrastructure, making sure that there's consistent standards to the application of construction of our physical infrastructure, like water and sewer on our streets. There's four little minor cleanup items. There had been a revision done in 2019 that went through the public process. This is really to clarify some of the things that we are doing informally now and the contracting public is already doing. So the first one is just clarifying the requirements for full concrete or asphalt with pavement repairs. What that's really about is if there's a intrusion into a section of concrete, rather than just fix that one piece, that the actual plate of the concrete be repaired. The second is some standard lane widths for pavement using pavement markings. We already do that, but there had been some questions about allowances for change of that, and the design criteria manual addresses that. The installation of a 4-inch diameter conduit for major street construction. What we're finding is the existing standard of 2 inches not large enough to accommodate all of the technology that's put into the street system. And then the final one was a maximum grade and turnaround areas for fire lane and pull box locations for street light design. All of those are standards we're applying today. This just clarifies and makes it very clear in the design criteria manual what the specification is for those items.
Any questions for Mr. Parajan? Okay, thank you, Mr. Parajan. Mr. Buskin, are there any speakers on this item?
No, sir, there are not.
Okay, then I'll call for a motion. We have a motion for approval from Councilmember Capard, a second from Councilmember Odom Wesley. Please cast your votes. Motion passes. Next, we move to 12.2, City of Arlington, Texas Rangers Baseball Complex Admissions and Parking Taxes Revenue Bonds, Taxable Series 2020. I'll call upon Mr. Ethan Kloss, Treasurer of Finance Department.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council, or evening, Mayor and Council. This is to pass an ordinance and approve master indenture and first supplemental indenture to issue bonds that are supported by the admission and parking tax that were originally voted on by the voters back in 2017. So if you have any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Kloss? Okay, thank you. Okay, and Mr. Buskin, are there any speakers on this item?
No, sir, there are not.
Okay, then I'll call for a motion. Okay, we have a motion for approval from Councilmember Moise, a second from Councilmember Odom Wesley. Please cast your votes. Motion passes. Next, we move to 12.3, which is the first and final reading of an ordinance consenting to the continuation of the proclamation of a local state of disaster, authorizing additional authority related to local state of disaster, adopting and approving certain rules to protect the health of persons in the city, providing for a fine for certain provisions of up to $500 for each offense in violation of this ordinance, providing this ordinance be cumulative, providing for severability, governmental immunity, injunctions, publication, and effective date, and declaring an emergency. I'll call upon Ms. Tara Solis, our city attorney here.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The item before you is due to a supplemental posting due to the emergency of the COVID-19. And as a result, there is an item on for your consideration. It is an ordinance that would ratify the local disaster that the mayor proclaimed on March 13th. You would be consenting to that and continuing it until you take further action to discontinue that emergency. That the city manager would be giving authority to execute any and all contracts and agreements that do not exceed $200,000 per agreement. But that authority is only good during the term of the emergency. That the city ordinance or regulations imposing time requirements for payments or filing, appealing decisions, anything pursuant to an ordinance, if there are certain time limits, that the city manager has the authority to extend those deadlines if needed. Further, it goes on to limit the size of gatherings to no more than 125 people. And it limits the occupancy of certain locations to 50% occupancy as set forth on the business's certificate of occupancy, or 125 individuals, whichever is less. Those locations impacted would be restaurants, coffee shops, bars, arcades, event centers, gyms, hotels, restaurants, hotel restaurants, meeting spaces, ballrooms, retail stores, theaters, convenience stores, public buildings, plazas, churches, and malls and shopping centers. There are certain locations that are excluded, such as office buildings, residential buildings, grocery stores, manufacturing locations, nonprofit service providers, airports, homeless and emergency shelters, daycares, and medical facilities. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have on this map.
Well, I'll go ahead and just share with you, we have had great cooperation here from our citizens in trying to work through the pandemic. And in addition to that, we've had great cooperation there from our business community, many of them already closing on their own there, especially the large gathering places. Very much appreciate that. And then in addition to that, we've seen great cooperation from our schools. There, both our public and private schools have been great partners. There are phone calls and meetings going on, and I should say conference calls going on along with meetings each and every day. The situation is very fluid and very much appreciate the partnership that we have with Tarrant County. Judge Whitley has been a great leader here in working through this, and of course also we have had medical professionals from all over the world to help here with this pandemic, and then also to help us here in Arlington. We have had tremendous access to the medical professionals. And then in addition to that, I want to also single out our churches and mosques and synagogues. The people here who have been taking it on themselves to go out and deliver food to some of our high-risk citizens, especially our elderly, to keep them in, and have taken that on. Also, in the mix of that, also working on child care. And then, in fact, many of our churches are calling for tomorrow night to be a community prayer time. Although we can't gather together physically, we can gather together spiritually and pray for our community and pray for great wisdom there among everyone who's dealing with this, and pray for healing, and appreciate how our community has come together there on it. As I mentioned too, that our businesses have been cooperating, I want to single out our restaurants. Our restaurants have been working hard to try to do the best they can in moving tables around, creating that social distancing, and complying with the guidelines here that we have, and I most appreciate it. They also are providing takeout and some delivery. I think it's very important there that our citizens there try to support our restaurants. A lot of us here in Arlington know that many of our restaurants are locally owned and operated. They also employ a lot of people, so it'll be important that we remember them in the takeout. And of course, without a doubt, we're discouraging big gatherings and so forth, and trying to stay in your home there all you can. And then many of our businesses are also having you work at home, but also we're doing a whole lot of teleconferencing and telephoning there also. All of those guidelines are still there. All that being said, we have a very fluid situation. We must be prepared that we will be doing further restrictions, guidelines, and so forth if, and when we're being told by the medical professionals when, that we have a spread of the virus. And so we've got to remain patient. We also have to follow our medical professionals, and every citizen in Arlington is not a medical professional. And that's something I have to remind myself, that we need to be sure that we are listening to the foremost medical professionals that are helping us here. We're very grateful for Dr. Simmons, who is our local doctor in charge of our public health. We also are very grateful for Tarrant County Public Health and the people that are working there. Also, I'm very thankful for our Chief Krausen, who has been through several of infectious disease there, and our Emergency Operations Center. They are very well versed and are going to continue to provide all the help and assistance there that we are going to need as we move forward. But I do want to say the situation is fluid. We have got to be able to move, and so consequently we do have those tools, and I appreciate Governor Abbott actually enacting the ability for us to be able to have emergency meetings and be able to move there as we need to there to protect our citizens. I'd like to call upon our city attorney, Tara Solis, to give you an idea of what the governor has done there to help us to be more nimble and fluid. Ms. Solis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The governor has suspended some of the restrictions of the Open Meetings Act, such that if you need to take actions to amend the ordinance that's in front of you as things are progressing, you've got the ability to hold some meetings, particularly by telephone or video conference. And in those kind of scenarios, in the past, you'd have to have a quorum here at the council chambers and still allow the public to come in. And in the current situation, that can be kind of risky for everybody. So in regards to that, there have been some suspension of provisions of the Open Meetings Act that will allow the telephone and video where people will be able to phone in or dial in and have a two-way communication with the council. They just won't have to be here physically, so things will still be transparent and open. We just won't be doing it in a physical setting the same way.
With that, I'd also like to call upon our city manager, Mr. Yelverton, with any other thoughts.
I'd just like to add for the people watching to take a look at this afternoon's briefing. We had Dr. Simmons and Chief Krausen provide a good detailed overview of the current situation, and then as you pointed out, Mayor, we're continuing to evolve, and I expect that we'll end up modifying some of the directives that we're passing tonight in relatively short order, given additional information that continues to flow.
Then also we would encourage our citizens to go to our website. Our communications department is literally posting multiple times each day. We're also pushing that out on social media. We encourage you to read and study that, but also to share it because it's so important that we get the information out to our citizens. And then let me share with you that in the midst of this, we've got to make sure that public safety and the health of our citizens comes number one, and that we also make sure that we are able to provide the essential services that we have, but also know that we also realize we've got to try to help take care of our citizens there as far as their jobs and their businesses, and we're doing the best we can to balance that. And this is a very hard time, a very difficult time there in which and many of the steps we're taking are very calculated and have been practiced and planned through our emergency operations plan. But however, this virus is not any virus that we've had before. And so consequently, it is going to require us to take other steps there, as the city manager said. But know that we have got to help each other. We have got to do it the Arlington way and show that can-do spirit in which we are helping each other, because some are going to be hit harder than others. And we've got to be willing to help each other as we move through this, because we are all in it together. And we have been a very giving city, been very generous there to help those in need, and we've got to continue to do it, but yet we're going to have to do more as the weeks move ahead, because there are going to be many that are going to be hit harder than others, and we have got to reach out with that hand of kindness to help each other. I appreciate there already the many volunteers that are working to help in this difficult situation. So with that, I'd like to call upon Mr. Buskin to see if there's any speakers on this item.
No, sir, there are no speakers on this item.
Then I'll call for a motion there on this item. We have a motion for approval from Councilmember Capehart, a second from Councilmember Odom Wesley. Please cast your votes. Motion passes. Okay, next we move to consideration of resolutions. Adopting the capital budget for the City of Arlington for fiscal year 2020. And I'll call upon Mr. Mike Finley, Finance Director.
Thank you, Mayor, members of City Council, Mike Finley. The three items before you are adopting the fiscal year 2020 capital budget as presented at the February 25th council meeting. There's a total of $161,733,083.8 million in fire, airport, parks, and public works projects, funded by general obligation bonds of $47.9 million, certificates of obligation of $3.5 million, fiscal year 19 ending balance of $450,000, and airport gas totals of $100,000. We also have $20,525,000 of stormwater bonds, split essentially evenly between pay-as-you-go fund balance and revenue bonds, and $57.3 million in water utilities, $33.3 million cash balance from pay-go funds, $21.3 million in Texas Water Development bonds, excuse me, and $2.7 million in revenue bonds. These three resolutions can be taken together, Mayor.
Any questions for Mr. Finley? Okay, Mr. Buskin, are there any speakers on this item?
No, sir, there are not.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Finley. Appreciate your help. And with that, I'll call for a motion. We have a motion for approval from Councilmember Moise, a second from Councilmember Capehart. Please cast your votes. Motion passes, and that, by the way, did for all three, right?
Acceptable, everybody?
We didn't,
They're saying
everybody,
that is what the intent was.
everybody all right that was the intent, okay? All right. Then next, we'll move to item 13.2, resolution expressing intent to reimburse certain capital budget expenditures. Mr. Finley.
Thank you, Mayor. What this item does is allow us to reimburse expenditures prior to the bonds being sold, so that departments can go ahead and start, based on your approval this evening, using existing city funds that will be then reimbursed upon the selling of the bonds. I'll be glad to take any questions.
Okay, any questions here for Mr. Finley? Okay. Mr. Buskin, are there any speakers on this item?
No, sir.
Okay, then I'll call for a motion. We have a motion for approval from Councilmember Sutton, a second from Councilmember Nunez. Please cast your votes. Motion passes. Next, we move to citizen participation. Do we have any?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay, and then for announcements, Mr. Buskin.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to remind our residents, Arlington City Council evening meetings are rebroadcast on Sundays at 6 p.m. and on Wednesday and Saturday mornings at 6:30 a.m. The council's afternoon work sessions are rebroadcast on Sundays at 1 p.m., Wednesdays at 1:30 p.m., and on Saturdays at 6 p.m. You can also watch the meetings online anytime at www.arlingtontx.gov.
Okay, I have another announcement. I mentioned it earlier, but many of our churches have come together to call for an evening of prayer there tomorrow night, and I'll just read what they have sent to me. So we'd like to invite the churches of Arlington, Texas to unite together for a time of prayer for our city on Wednesday evening, March the 18th, 2020. While we are unable to gather physically, we can gather spiritually as one voice before our Lord as followers of Jesus. We are compelled by His compassion to call on our God for intervention in the midst of unprecedented crisis. The churches across our city are already joined together on an ancient journey toward the miracle of Easter Sunday. Easter reminds us of the miraculous, life-giving power of the gospel. It also reminds us of the brokenness of our world that required an atoning sacrifice for the sinfulness of humanity. Easter also is a season of celebration for the church as we are reminded of God's unending love for His world. Throughout history, God's people have responded to human suffering with compassion, care, and courage. We will seek to be good stewards in this challenging moment in this community, nation, and world. We will be praying for those infected by the virus, the medical community serving as our city leaders, our community's business owners, all who are affected by the economic implications of this crisis, our school children, those who are most vulnerable. We will also be praying to God to bring healing and potential medical cures for this disease. We will be praying for God's people to know how to demonstrate compassion and love throughout our city during this challenging time. Blessings. Signed by 10 ministers here in our community. Y'all, it's a time for coming together. Already, as I mentioned, our mosque and synagogues have also been reaching out. Our faith-based community is doing incredible things, and we're going to have to do more in this evolving situation that we have, which has turned into a crisis, needless to say. But let us rise above it and let us work together as we move forward. Any other announcements? All right, this meeting stands adjourned. Thank you.